think they'd sacrifice the Olympics and then would even attack Taiwan if they thought their grip on power required it.
I thank you very much for joining us in Los Angeles, Perry Link. Hello again, I'm Ian Masters. We're speaking then with Perry Link, who's a professor of Chinese at Princeton University. I'm now speaking with Yoshi Tsurumi, who is a professor of business and international marketing at Baruch College of City University of New York. And 30 years ago, he was the professor who taught George W. Bush at Harvard Business School. And just to begin with, Yoshi Tsurumi, it seems to me that it's not entirely fair to judge somebody by who they were 30 years ago.
Well, Mr. Masters, that I've been accused of exactly doing that, but you have to recognize that when I had George W. Bush in graduate school, he was already 28.
And he just come from the Texas Air National Guard.
Yes, by any other standards, not his case, he's still juvenile, but by any other standards in any society, he was an adult.
He was an adult, right?
And besides, he was in a privileged position.
Right.
The point I've been making is only my expose of what he said he did 30 years ago at the Harvard Business School is not to point out that his kind of juvenile foibles, but the current problems you can see with this presidency, tendencies to lie, and especially lied people into accepting his preposterous policies against Iraq and many other things. Domestically, he's lying about the solvency of Social Security, for example, to simply destroy it, and without ever telling his true intention. The true intention is to destroy the New Deal that systems the United States has built up. So if you accuse me, was not you personally,
right,
all right, that was 30 years ago, people change. The reply is very simple. He demonstrated already 30 years ago all these current serious problems as unfit president. Okay, the leadership, my definition of leadership is just you have to have a compassion and you have to understand for the mass and people as well. In the United States, historically, we have a series of the presidents who, basically most of them came from the privileged positions. Most recently, even J.F. Kennedy or a year ago, Franklin Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt, you name it. Mm. So it's not how they are brought up in terms of economic privilege and so forth, but the more intellectually and religiously how they are brought up. Bush has come from the privileged position, and yet I saw him as my student who was totally lacking of any kind of what I see is the social responsibility or compassion for the
noblesse oblige. Yes.
No concept of noblesse oblige.
Right.
He was totally disconnected already 30 years ago from the social and the moral responsibility for his private actions.
Well, you also at that time he just come from the Texas Air National Guard, and apparently he used to like to wear his flight jacket in class.
Right.
At a time when across the other side of the university they were protesting the Vietnam War. He also told you in a corridor that his daddy and his friends had got him out of the Vietnam War by getting him into the Guard.
Yes, he told me that at that time Vietnam was still the hot issue among the students.
Right.
And he told me just that he was in the Texas National Guard, and I said, "How lucky you!" And I said, "How did you get in?" Then my dad got me into it.
I see.
So he didn't feel any ashamed of it, because at that time I don't think he was even thinking of running for the governor of Texas or any public office. So he was quite honest about it.
Right.
And kind of surprised me, more than surprised me, but certainly just shocked me, was that he thought he is entitled to all this privileged position, privileged treatment that he has received because of his father's connection or their father's friends. Yes, that means abuse of power. To him, that abusive of the power came with him as kind of birthright, and he thought and he's superior to other people for that reason. And that was bad. For example, he avoided the Vietnam draft, and then he didn't serve in Vietnam, and yet he was totally for continuing with Vietnam War at that time. That's why I admonished him, saying, now look, George, that it's one thing for you to avoid going to Vietnam, right, but it's another for you to really just keep demanding the poor souls, the younger men and women, to keep on dying for you.
Well, he's doing that today in Iraq.
Yes. So all I'm saying is, it is not that I'm trying to merely doing this expose of 30 years ago. What I'm saying is, his policies, his really failed leadership, his disastrous foreign and domestic policies, right, were already based on his behavior, as well as, more importantly, his belief systems, or prejudices, you call it.
Well, now it's interesting that his grandfather was heavily fined and had his money taken away from him because of his pro-Nazi stand prior to the war,
right,
and Prescott Bush spent his political career trying to exonerate himself from the shame of being, and of course all of the all the big rich families in America were pro-Nazi prior to World War II anyway.
Right.
So it wasn't, Henry Ford, all of them. And Ford was new money, but all the old money people were. And so that wasn't particularly, but at least Prescott Bush went into the mainstream, and George Herbert Walker Bush, Bush's father, also seemed to have some sense of social conscience, even though he defeated largely in the debates with Clinton, because he didn't even know what a supermarket checkout machine was, and he sort of had that same arrogance that the young Bush has, particularly in the presidential debates, where his attitude was, "Why am I here in the first place? I don't need to debate this hick from Arkansas or this guy from Massachusetts." So you're saying that the kid had none of the humility that his grandfather or his father appeared to have.
None of that the grandfather or even father demonstrated. In terms of his the international relations, how the world fits together.
Well, he'd never traveled until recently, and he'd only went to Rome to visit his daughter in Israel, where he met Ariel Sharon. So let me ask you then about what you've written in the Harvard Crimson, which is more. A broader look at your experience of having taught at Harvard Business School and having a sense of this is the school that turns out the young CEOs, and it does seem that we're in a slash and burn, take no prisoners capitalist environment. And you have written in the Harvard Crimson that the American economic study has increasingly become a pseudoscience of mathematical formula manipulation, and that is devoid of humanity. And this is the economic model that has conquered the American business education and by extension pervaded corporate America, and has become fused with the robber baron culture of greed supremacy. So you think that the old capitalism in this country that came out of World War II, there was a sense of social contract because of everybody pitched in World War II, that's gone, and I guess that this new predatory class of capitalists that George Bush represents and that the Republican Congress is supplicant to and provides essentially is the legislative extension of corporate America. They are at war with the American middle class. What's left of it?
Well, it's a war with about 3/4 of Americans, but anyway, but they can thrive politically because they fool about the religious right-wingers into believing that the these Bushites, Bush groups are really perpetuating the same kind of cultures or Christian beliefs that the bottom half of Americans believe.
Now, just let me just interrupt briefly. Why do you think it is that these Christian soldiers continually vote for the interests of the 1% who run this country, and they, in the heartland of this country, they're going to be the first to be hurt by, for example, the new bankruptcy bill that was just passed? They're, basically paying more taxes, getting less. How are they able to get these good Christians in this country to carry the water for this small elite of corporate power?
Well, I'm not a psychologist, but as a teacher, you have to try to understand students. I believe that most of them are very insecure, and they don't have economically not much to show for, or even socially, and that's why they are very much jealous of so-called Eastern establishment or intellectuals whom they hate. And the Bush groups and powers to be are very good at exploiting the Christian right or groups, the sense of insecurity to believe that they have to hang on to the idea of God. That's the only thing you're going for him. And eventually, if I venture to predict that or maybe this is where my wishful thinking gets mixed up with conviction, but I think the Christian soldiers are finally coming to realize that their social, economic, political interests are not being looked after by the robber baron type of Bush and his groups. Just to take the case of the social security issues. This, I think, Bush has taken on the wrong issue to do it. So finally, people begin to see that they have to consider also their pocketbook nerves instead of the Christian beliefs as well. But when you talk about Christianity, that they are arrogant, that they believe they are the only kind of Christians, and that there are many types of Christians, but I thought American civic values, Judeo-Christian civic values, require the tolerance, compassion, independence, moral courage, honesty of all the things.
Right.
And unfortunately, the Texas, Bush comes from the Texas culture, not his brother and senior Bush Walker. His father or grandfather, they are from New Englanders. But George Bush, is a product of Texas culture, very much so, religiosity and,
Right, Texas values. And Tom DeLay.
Yeah, anti-intellectualism and those phony, this is the religiosity. No, so when people tell me that the people, even Bush must have changed, for during 30 years. My answer is very simple. Yes, he has changed. He has changed for worse. Because when he was a student of mine, he called the Franklin Roosevelt as a socialist, and all this the New Deal innovation like a social securities, Securities Exchange and Commission and employment labor movement, or rather democratic re-engineering, total restructuring of American society. He called them socialist. But at least he didn't have this phony religious, that the mumbo-jumbo to rationalize his prejudices. Mm-hmm. After he left Texas, Harvard, and went back to Texas, and then he has come to rationalize his prejudices as the God-given right to do it.
Well, again, if you remove the religiosity, whether it's real or phony, you always end up with the same result. If he were to succeed in his Social Security, in quotes, reform, it's based upon the Peruvian model. Yeah. And we know from Peru that they've had this, I think, for about 15 odd actually longer than that, I think. And we know that everybody that opted into the same plan that Bush is trying to sell here cannot live on their pensions, and the people on the state pensions, the old system, are able to maintain a standard of living. But we also know that the Peruvian equity markets, money markets, stock exchange have been booming. So the bottom line with Bush's so-called reform of Social Security is to pump all of that money, into the equity markets, and they're the only people who'll profit. That's the subsidies for the Wall Street. That's nothing short of that. But going back to the point you made, that how is George Bush's current unfitness as the president being magnified by what I consider flawed business educations or economic studies in the United States. Right. But at that time, as I pointed out in this Harvard Crimson article, that the Bush kind of students were at that time was in a way in the minority who showed the serious disconnect with the moral and social responsibility for their actions. Today, the point I'm trying to make is today he would be in the comfortable majority, overwhelming majority of business students and scholars or teachers. Right, and the kind of economics that he represents are the ones that dominate. The biggest company in this country, Walmart, is a model of this kind of lack of social responsibility. They don't even pay their people enough money to have proper health care, and they're perfectly happy to have their employees depend upon the government or welfare, and at the same time, rather than pay their people enough, they propagandize on television with endless TV commercials showing how wonderful they are. So we are living in an extremely cynical world. But, this process of the corporatization of America and the fact that Washington, or the representatives in Washington, particularly the Republicans, no longer represent people, they represent capital. Yeah. This has been in the works for a long time. And people who've just paid their taxes have to know that in 1940, corporate America was responsible for 60% of the revenues that the government took on. 60% of the revenues in the 1940s came from corporate taxes. Today, it's only 13% of the revenues. So, again, the rich, the corporations, don't pay their share, but they have managed to seem to dominate the debate and the press and get everybody beguiled. I mean, look at the way they're selling this war. They're losing this war. The same press that is telling us that things are going well in Iraq are the same press that can't even walk out of their damn hotels. Yes. And they can't report. I mean, the level of the cynicism and stupidity. I think the country's lost its mind. I think we're all in a revival tent getting fleeced. Well, when we have the very compliant media, mainstream media, act as a megaphone for those powers to be, the corrupt. What I call just it's oligarchies, not the democracy. But the point I'd like to make is the Bush group is purposely, not inadvertently, purposely destroying the U.S. system which we have built up since the Great Depression. I call it New Deal innovations. They are destroying it purposely to push the United States back to what I consider Gilded Age. We have that from the end of 19th century to early 20th century, the Gilded Age, Robert Baron era. Right. Well, that's really what this Grover Norquist's plan is. Yeah, and they are purposely trying to push the United States back to that Robert Baron age. And the business education is certainly rationally helping them to rationalize them, because it's based on phony idea that the corporations exist to make money. Right? Well, with that assumption, so whatever you do to make money, never mind how. Well, I'd just say in closing, Professor Tsurumi, welcome to Paris Hilton's America. Yes. This is the America of Paris Hilton, where we're all, admiring this airhead because she's rich, and we'll all, go to church, give Jerry Falwell our savings, and watch Paris Hilton, on some airhead TV show. And that's, this is unfortunately the sad state of affairs. I thank you for joining us and filling us in on your student 30 years ago who not only is running this country but is also representative of this new kind of predatory capitalism and this new Gilded Age.
It makes me sad, although that other teachers, we don't think we can influence everybody we teach, but when you see one glaring failure, certainly it makes me feel bad. The least I can do is with your help. I've been trying to expose his phoniness, that's all.
Right. Okay. Well, you've done a good job, and I thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye. Hello again. I'm Ian Masters. They're speaking then with Professor Yossi Sarumi, who's a professor of business and international marketing at Baruch College, City University of New York. And 30 years ago, he taught President George W. Bush at the Harvard Business School. I'm now speaking with Mark Potok, who is the director of the Intelligence Project at the Southern Poverty Law School, which oversees all hate groups, monitoring hate groups. And he has followed the case of the Christian terrorist Eric Rudolph, who was recently sentenced to 4 life sentences. And I understand, Mark, that the reason that the plea bargain was agreed to by the government was that Rudolph, in exchange for not being put to death, although he's apparently perfectly happy to put other people to death, he himself didn't want to be put to death. He had hidden 200 pounds of TNT, which he gave the location of, and I think the federal authorities were worried that either somebody would inadvertently trigger it or some acolyte of Rudolph's would get hold of it. The other factor I understand was that the feds weren't even sure that a jury in Alabama would have given him the death penalty because of his professed Christian beliefs, Rudolph's professed Christian beliefs. So,
the truth is, I really doubt that. I think actually a jury in Alabama probably would have sent him to the gas chamber. The reality is that, first of all, I mean, it's reasonable, I guess, to call Rudolph a Christian terrorist in the sense that.
Well, we're very ready to call anybody from the Middle East an Islamic terrorist.
Well, that's what I was going to say. If you're going to call people who are really way out on the extremes of the Islamic faith Islamic terrorists, I suppose, in the same sense, so one might call Rudolph a Christian terrorist. I mean, the reality is that the theology, at least certainly that we believe, the theology that Rudolph has long embraced is something called Christian identity. And that is so wildly heretical that, 99.99% of Christians, the people who consider themselves Christian, would certainly see it as heretical. I mean, this is a theology that includes the idea that, actually the Bible is the history of the white race, and Jews, people who call themselves Jews on earth today are not really the Hebrews of the Bible, but in fact are biologically descended from Satan. But yes, in any event, it is a theology that does use the Bible in however heretical way it may be.
Well, it also
as the
uses
basis of their beliefs.
Sure, but Mark, it also uses abortion, and the thing that's frightening about abortion, and it was clear from the grandstanding at the Terry Schiavo, stuff that went on down in Florida recently, is that. The thing that's disturbing about these anti-abortion people is that that's essentially a moral free ride, and to me that's the same slippery slope that the Nazis went down in giving the German people the exemption to break the law and to break the commandments, in effect. That if you are so concerned about somebody else's fetus that you have the right to kill somebody is mind-boggling. But these people seem to have gotten their heads around that, that it's okay to kill an abortion doctor because he's doing something that's even more evil.
Yeah, and really a bit more than merely the doctor. I mean, many of these people are perfectly willing to shoot anyone in any way associated with the clinic. And, of course, in the case of Eric Rudolph, this man set off a bomb in the middle of the 1996 Olympics in Atlanta, where you could hardly say that, we're somehow targeting evil abortionists. I mean, for him, the connection was, well, somehow the government has endorsed this mass murder of unborn children, therefore it's A-OK to set off a bomb in the middle of a huge crowd of people who, are simply going to be entertained.
But they only care about this child before they're born. It's not a pro-life position in any kind of morally consistent way.
Oh, I think that's absolutely true. And if Rudolph is indeed identity, which he denies, but I certainly continue to believe, and I think the evidence is very strong, then really what most Christian identity believers think is that abortion is a terrible thing for the white race. It is a dastardly thing that has been foisted off on whites, or Aryans, as they would say, by the satanic Jew, and that this is some sort of Jewish plot to destroy the race of white people. So, they very much feel that abortion is fine for black people and for other groups, but not for white people because, the white people are an endangered race and so on. But I should say, by the way, these are things that Rudolph has not said explicitly, but that is certainly common identity belief.
But what gives him this moral free ride to divert this hatred that seems to be unreal and it's hard to believe that it's really about somebody else's fetus, because the idea that he put nails in these bombs particularly at the abortion clinic. I mean I saw an extensive interview with the woman who's been blinded and had hundreds of operations.
Yeah, I know Emily Lyons personally.
You do? Well,
to look at her body is quite something.
Oh, and I saw the X-rays, and you can see these nails all through her body. It's just heart-wrenching. Just again, this is what you study. Explain to me this hatred. I'm not sure it's really explainable. I mean, I think that one thing that needs to be said in all of this is that at the beginning, it was really Christian right groups that led us into this world that essentially said, Operation Rescue did not say it's okay to murder the abortionist, but they very much, as an institution, paved the way to that kind of thinking. And, of course, it was a number of people out of that world, out of the more mainstream world of abortion protests, the people who would kind of block clinics and glue their locks and so on. It is from that very milieu that come the very hardest line people out there, the people who have murdered doctors around the country, the people who have set off bombs. That wasn't true, incidentally, of Rudolph. There are known connections of him to the kind of larger anti-abortion movement. I think what's really happened in the last few years is that the anti-abortion movement has become so extreme that it's become much smaller and actually has much less support from the broad public. And as a result, I think the Christian right, as a general matter, has latched on to the idea of gays are wicked. And in the aftermath of the Lawrence decision in 2003, striking down sodomy statutes around the country, I would say that the Christian right is very much concentrating on this, sort of battle against the gay man and the terrible threat of gay marriage and so on. And I think they're right that there's more resonance, there's more support for that kind of thing, and I think it's quite frightening because I would say, to pick up on something you said earlier, that to listen to Christian right leaders, even people like Pat Robertson and James Dobson and so on, Jerry Falwell, they do not sound so dissimilar when they are talking about gays from what Germans in 1932 and 1933 speaking about Jews sounded like. Well, that's where I say it's a moral free ride. If you get the exemption to divert your personal hatred from whatever its source into something else that is considered beyond the pale, then it's a free-for-all.
I think you're totally right. I think that, when the Pat Robertsons of the world stand up and say, Orlando, Florida will be destroyed by God with tornadoes and hurricanes because Disney World holds a gay day in which, gay couples get those slightly discounted prices, he, in effect, is paving the way for the 19-year-old kid that beats some gay man to death out front of a bar someplace.
So these people are these religious figures, as we for the want of a better description, are in fact playing with Christian terrorism. It's not too far from their positions, and it's also not too far from the very issues that are going on in the government now. The nuclear option, and today the head of the Senate, the born again Mr. Frist, is speaking to a forum of these so-called Christian leaders, these evangelicals, laying the groundwork for his presidential run in 2008, but also laying the groundwork for an attempt to overturn the Constitution of the United States and to impose their agenda. Even though they get 95% of their judges approved, they want the 100%. And this is, again, it gets back to abortion and anti-gays, because this is ultimately the litmus test. They talk about it in Christian terms, but it's really about legal legitimacy of this kind of bigotry. And it seems that, I don't know why we're not talking about this and focusing on the obvious. It's obviously about the Supreme Court. The reason they're changing trying to get rid of the filibuster is because they know they're going to have probably two chances at the Supreme Court, and then, of course, if they can stack them with these witch-burning judges, then you can turn America back to the 16th century.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's certainly and obviously true.
A little bit of hyperbole, I might confess to.
Well, yeah, but I mean, look. Let me say that my specialty is not the broad right wing, of which there is much these days, but quote unquote extremism or the radical right. And I think it bears mentioning that extremism is a very slippery word these days, because of course, we talk about extremism, you're talking about something relative to the center, and I think it's perfectly obvious that over the last 20 plus years, the center has moved very, very substantially to the right, so that positions that were once considered, and there was a time, believe it or not, it's hard to remember, but when affirmative action largely was only attacked by groups like the Klan. Of course, that is very much a mainstream Republican position these days, and yeah, so we spend, I was going to just mention that we spend a lot of effort in our world, in the work I do, at kind of exposing these sort of infiltrations or leaks of extremism or extremist ideas into the mainstream, and it's increasingly common to see these kinds of ideas affecting or being adopted, whether out of true belief or out of cynical pandering to voters, but being adopted by politicians who are quite prominent.
Well, then, what is wrong with the moderates, the middle in this country, and the press at large, not to contextualize what we're talking about and not to see the links between Tom DeLay and Eric Rudolph, between Falwell and Robinson, and these anti-abortion terrorists? Well,
I mean, I think what really has happened is that over the course of the last 30 years, the hard rights, ranging all the way over to the radical rights, has actually engaged in a very successful and concerted effort at institution building. And this comes during a period when the left, the sort of progressive left, liberal left, whatever you want to call it, has engaged mainly in sniping at one another. It's sniping at other people on essentially the same side. I think the left has done a terrible job over the last couple of decades at building any kind of counterattack. And meanwhile, we see these whole sets of institutions, funding foundations like the Scaife Foundations, anti-immigration foundations, many of which today actually pass for mainstream and nonpartisan, like the Center for Immigration Studies in Washington, which really is a creation, at least at the beginning, of bigots. And the list goes on and on and on. I just think that there has been a great deal of work done by not only the Christian right, but several different sectors of the right, and that has really not been countered by the left. And obviously, I think big hunks of the media have been sort of captured. Talk radio was lost to the right many years ago. Obviously, they have also managed to build such institutions as Fox, which claims to be a real-life news channel, I think rather absurdly, and the Washington Times, which we actually just published. As a matter of fact, I have something at the printer right now, which exposes very serious connections of the Washington Times to real-life white supremacists, people who talk in Klan-like terms.
Well, the guy that runs that is just crazy as a bedbug.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's not the Moonies per se who are making the thing such a terrible piece of work, but the people who actually run it on the ground.
But just in closing, though, when you talk about the American left, it seems to me that it's not about the left, it's about reality. When is reality going to get some traction? I mean, does reality matter anymore?
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, one of our big battles down here in the South is looking at the neo-Confederate movement, which is very much a powerful thing, a thing that's come up just in the last 7 or 8 years, and which is engaged right now very desperately in trying to rewrite the history of the Civil War. So that, you listen to these people, many of whom are professors, and they will tell you the Civil War had nothing whatsoever to do with slavery. And that is an absolute falsehood.
Guess what, Mark? The South won. It's back. Walmart, the right to work. They run the Republican Party. They control the country. They won. At any rate, let's leave on that somewhat sarcastic note. And I thank you very much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me.
Bye-bye. Hello again. I'm Ian Masters. I was just speaking then with Mark Putin, who is works for the Southern Poverty Law Center, where he oversees their hate group monitoring projects.